The caravan had covered several leagues by midday, and a halt was called at the edge of the forest. Bo offered to scout out the woods while lunch was served, while Tim took a rest on a nearby rock. Removing his boots, he upended them and shook the tiny stones out, fishing around for any that might have lodged themselves while he walked. Lunch was being passed around, a slice of cheap brown bread and cheese, while the water skins were collected and refilled. The bread was the size of his palm and as thick as his thumb, and the cheese was creamy and fresh. While a lord or lady would turn up their nose at such a meager offering, Tim was thankful for the food, devouring both before his skin was returned. Maybe skipping breakfast wasn't such a good idea with the long trail ahead of them. As he chewed the last morsel, a voice came from behind him. "Are there eyes in the back of your head, kid?" Tim had expected Bo when he turned, but the face and clothes were as different as the voice had been. A long holden beard adorned the blue-painted face, partially hidden by a cowl that flowed into a long, blood-red cloak. In his hands he held a broad axe with a wicked half-moon blade. Tim jumped at the dour man's appearance and grabbed his copper hoe, holding it defensively. "Stupid kid, if I wanted to, you would already be dead." "Bo will be back any minute now," Tim replied, uncertain what else to do. "Bo," the painted man repeated. "Why would I care when Bo returns?" "The farmer mistook you for a bandit, Dallin." The wagon master's voice came from behind, making Tim jump again. "Farmer?" Dallin scoffed. "I can smell the blood on his weapon." "It's a hoe, nothing more than a tool," Tim objected. "So is a sword or an axe or a hammer," Dallin replied with a smirk. "It becomes a weapon when used to kill." "Stop scaring the kid. He killed a bandit yesterday and hasn't come to terms with it just yet." Dallin eyed Tim even more, examining him like an insect as the wagon master told the story. Tim wanted nothing more than to slip away, but the jade-green eyes of Dallin held him in place just as firmly as a wall against his back would have. After the wagon master finished, Dallin let out a long sigh and shook his head annoyed. "The least you can do for stealing our prey is offer us a meal, Lucian. I'll do you one better, old friend. Take a ride on the wagons on your way back to town. And watch your ass in the meantime?" Dallin chuckled. "Only if you're paying for our time." Tim felt confused and afraid as the wagon master and the painted man headed to the wagons, while several other red-robed men seemed to melt out of the trees to follow. They were near silent as they walked, every movement measured and no effort wasted. These were dangerous men, and though their leader seemed cordial with the wagon master, Tim hoped that Bo would return soon. // Bo seemed worried when Tim ran up to him. He listened intently to Tim's description of the dangerous men that had been invited into the caravan. The red cloaks and blue paint on their faces seemed to hold his attention the most. When Tim finished telling the story, Bo asked for more detail before nodding in acceptance. "I see, and they gave you quite a shock. Well then, there is only one thing to do about it." Bo walked toward the caravan, which seemed ready to move on, and Tim followed in his wake, convinced that the warrior would take charge of the situation. As the first wagons passed, Bo strode menacingly toward the first red cloak he saw. Tim watched from a few feet away, hoe in hand and ready to assist if Bo required it. "Did your mother never teach you how to shave?" The red-cloaked figure froze before him as Bo's hand went to his scabbard. "Did your father never teach you how to sew?" Dallin replied, reaching for his axe. Tim tensed, expecting the worst and worried that his copper hoe might not be enough to turn the tide of battle. The eyes of the caravan turned to watch in fascination as the two men stared each other down. Without a word, weapons were drawn as both men ran at the other in a full sprint, only to slow to a lazy walk as the Met and Tim dropped his hoe as they reached out with their off hands and braced arms. "Glad to see you, Bo. How long has it been?" 2 years, Bo replied. "You scared the hell out of the farm boy, you know." Dallin turned to face Tim and lowered his hood. The blue paint on his face was gone, and the man didn't seem quite as intimidating as before as Dallin stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes. Bo laughed at the comical display and replaced his sword in its scabbard. "See, farmer, nothing to be afraid of." "But the cloak, right? In one swift movement, Dallin threw his axe into the dirt at his feet, and the cloak seemed to fly off his shoulders to rest on his forearm. The studded leather he wore hung loose on his shoulders, and instead of pants, he wore a kilt of bright green and yellow. His blonde hair was shaved from the sides of his head and kept short, and his green eyes no longer seemed to suggest malice. "It's an act kid. A prestige of the trade," Dallin said, taking a flourishing bow. "I am Dallin, and these are the Bloodhounds." On cue, the other men threw back their cloaks, revealing youthful, friendly faces and mismatched armor, but also a variety of weapons. Hand crossbows and daggers, as well as swords and axes. With their cloaks open, they resembled more of a troupe of actors than the ominous group who seemed to melt out of the woods. "They're bounty hunters," Bo explained, slapping Dallin on the shoulder, "warranted from the guilds and the nobles. Monsters and bandits are their prey, not farmers." "I'm sorry for..." "Nothing about it," Dallin said, waving off the apology. "The red cloak plays a part in the intimation, and I shouldn't have kept up the act." "And the paint?" Tim asked. "You mean the woad," Dallin corrected. "It's a gift from my god that heightens my senses. All of us use it when we are hunting. Tim, take point on the caravan. We can discuss the rest later." Tim nodded and picked up Ho's hoe, heading to the front of the caravan obedient, as a puppy and Bo waited for him to be out of earshot. "What does Azriaz want with the boy?" Bo asked seriously. "Same as Yoshia, I would imagine," Dallin replied. "Azriaz only said to keep an eye on the boy and prevent Yoshia's influence from you." "Honestly, Dallin, what are you doing out here?" "I am being honest. We were hunting a bounty. Several bandits that had robbed caravans carrying taxes to the king. Then this morning, Azriaz appeared in front of all of us, tending our fire and preparing our food. Damnedest thing I've ever seen a god do." "And then?" "Azriaz said our bounty had been taken, but he wasn't angry with us. We happened to be in the right place at the right time and asked us to keep an eye on the kid. He even led us to the caravan before he left. Yoshia woke me up in the middle of the night asking much the same," Bo admitted. "So if they're not fighting over him, why is he so important?" "Azriaz didn't mention, and I didn't ask. As long as my favorite with my god increases, I don't even care." Bo thought about it for a time as they walked, remembering what the Queen of Battle had told him to do. It was much the same as Azriaz had ordered of Dallin, to keep an eye on the boy and see to his education and safety. "Has Yoshia ever cooked for you?" Dallin asked. "No, and what does that have to do with anything?" "I was curious. Azriaz is truly the god of death, and his cooking can attest to that." Bo roared with laughter, nearly doubling over in mid-stride. Dallin and his bloodhounds had never failed to be welcome company on a long trip. They were good boys, all of them, and Azriaz was lucky to have Dallin as his child. Somewhere down the road, they would know why they were compelled by their deities to do this, and at least it promised to be an enjoyable journey.